We now return to Let's Play Suzerain. Doke. Finalization of the drafted constitutional changes. I was walking to my office, since today was the day to edit and make the final changes for the proposal to change the constitution of Sordland. The Reform Committee finally bore tangible results, and the draft of the changes were about to be presented to me. I walked in the marble corridors of the palace, thinking about the huge decisions I was going to take. At the entrance to my office, my secretary, Olivia, greeted me. "Good morning, Mr. President." "Good morning, Olivia. How are you today, sir?" "I'm perfectly fine." "Good to hear." She paused before taking my coat. It looked like she had something on her mind. "Mr. Rayne, can you give me a hint about your reform plans? If you ask me, taking away the judge's immunity is long overdue, but it might anger a lot of people in these halls." Well, I mean, it is none of her business, but, well, nothing's been decided yet. I hope you'll keep me informed. I'll take your coat now. Olivia left to hang up my coat. I entered my office and sat down. Not long after, Peter, Lucian, and Nia arrived. "Good morning, everybody." "Good morning, Mr. President." "Good morning. Time to finally get this proposal going." Peter placed the draft in front of me. "After your modifications, we'll be starting the process." Okay, well, let's go over each of the points that are in discussion for the draft. Well, apart from the first two sections of decreasing the Supreme Court's authority and limiting the presidential vetoes, nothing else has been agreed on unanimously. We could start talking about Section 3. This is about the impeachment process of the president. Currently, in cases of high treason and breaking the Constitution, the Supreme Court may impeach and try the president. Most reformists want the impeachment to be initiated by the Assembly. They think they do not have any power over potential rogue presidents that could abuse their power. Well, I mean, yeah, like the court is there to interpret the law, but the Assembly should have oversight over the president. Unfortunately, that does also make it highly political, but I mean, not like in our current government, the Supreme Court isn't also, I mean, do we really want the old guard in charge of that? I don't think so. The Assembly should have oversight over the President. It is the most democratic institution. This law is particularly dangerous for you in this case. We'll be going against the old guard, and if we prove to be successful in the Assembly, they'll be looking for anything they can to declare they'll be looking for anything they can declare unconstitutional to tackle you. All they need is the Supreme Court to impeach you. Oh, okay. I mean, okay. But, like, what do you... Is he just telling me the consequences of the opposite of what I just said? We should define a better impeachment process, I guess, is the thing to do here. Yes, we'll be collaboratively working on the specifics. Section 4. This is regarding the appointment of ministers. Currently, the President is free to appoint anyone from the members of the Assembly. Nobody else is involved in the process. There is definitely a demand to involve the Assembly in the process. Well, we could introduce a confidence vote. I think that would be a good balance. Because otherwise you're just leaving this position open for a president to appoint a bunch of his cronies, and we all know how that goes. Again, you're getting more politics in both of these, but at least here the president still has power to at least try and create a functioning ministry for themselves. So let's introduce a confidence vote. That was my suggestion as well, okay? I'm sure the reformists would completely support that. The fifth section is about our infamous electoral threshold. Most reformists want to lower the threshold as much as possible. Mr. Richter and the PFJP definitely want to see change on this topic. They find our 10% threshold to be anti-democratic, which is something I also agree with. Yes, but this is a delicate matter. The party, and I mean not even Albin, wants to change the threshold. They think that this would destroy our party in the long term. Not wrong. The 10% threshold is what allowed us to control half the assembly with only 30% majority in the elections. Well, I mean, I think we should work to decrease it for better representation, mostly because it allows other smaller parties to come in, and that dilutes the power of the old guard. So will this bring me back around to this? I guess I could do this. These are kind of the same thing, and this one is just making an excuse, whereas this one is more... This one's more committal than this one. I mean, I'm going to have to make a decision here in a moment anyway, I'm sure, but the high threshold is the reason why Swordish politics has become so isolated. You're right, even after Sol's resignation, we still have 3 parties in the Assembly. Even Mr. Kibner's NFP was barely elected. Don't forget that the Communist Party and the Workers' Party of Bludia both had close to 10% votes in the last election. You'd be opening their way into the Parliament in the future if you were to decrease the threshold. It is important you realize this. Of course, that would also mean the USP might lose its majority in the Assembly, sir. Well, I mean, this is a high and noble goal. This is very true. But I mean, this is kind of reassuring, I guess, if not a little naive. I don't know what is a better take. Again, this is kind of where the behind the scenes data would be nice to know a little bit, because does going idealistic help? Bear in mind, these are all members of my party, and they will be probably talking to other people of the party. So, like, you know, if I just say, yeah, whatever, we'll be fine. Like, are they gonna, you know, I mean, what does that do to the statistical number in the background for my party, and my party's support of me versus, like, you know, the idealism route? I mean, let's just be a little bit more confident here, I guess. Because this one is just, you know, this one, like, this is a statement you could disagree with. This one is like, well, okay. Like, no one's going to try and gainsay me, even if they would whisper about this otherwise, you know, behind my back. Don't worry, with these reforms, we'll be even more popular. I hope it works out, Mr. President. Lucian continued with the next section. Section 6, this is about the presidential decrees. Reformists demand more limitations to the president's executive powers. Mr. Richter has demanded them to be completely removed. I have suggested to bring some limitations to decrees regarding their applicability. While we keep them, we should try to make sure that they will only be used in emergency situations. We could also make it dependent on an enabling act from the Assembly. Sure, it would make the whole process longer, but as long as we have a majority, nothing really changes. Okay, so the decrees, if I recall, are basically like executive orders that currently are things that I can do and no one can gainsay. I'm not even sure where that's a thing. I don't remember where we read about that. Yeah, I mean, I don't remember where we read about that. Organizations, governmental. But yeah, that was brought up at some point in here. That was a thing where these decrees are basically me going above and beyond, and the assemblies say so. So we need to reform them, but do I want to commit to this just yet? Like, I'm not really sure. An enabling act. So basically, the two suggestions she's giving to me here are we could either just only do them in emergencies, or we could do this, what, like the assembly has to approve them? Or possibly override them? Let's think about this a bit longer. Sure, you'll have a long time before we start writing the final proposal together. Yeah, let's not play our cards yet. Next one is Section 7, Term Limits. Term limits? I mean, give me more information on this one specifically. They want us to include previously non-existing term limits. We shouldn't allow somebody like Sol holding on to his seat for 2 decades again. We should establish limits. Hey, if people keep electing one person, that means they really are content. The masses are scared of change. Even Sol knew he had to leave, but we will leave it to the president to decide. Well, I mean, I'm all for term limits, but, like, term limits for everybody. So, I don't know. Took a long time before he decided to step down. Again, let's just be non-committal right now. I'll take my time and seriously consider the options before settling on one. I guess, I guess my entire political doctrine here is like the trap card doctrine. Like, I'm not gonna try and do any of these extreme things until it's way too late and no one can stop me. Now I'll move on to the 8th section. We're reaching the end. It's the question about the immunity of the judges. While the anti-Old Guard sentiment is increasing, there are talks about taking away their immunity. There are talks that taking away their immunity would give us authority over judiciary. I do not support taking away their power for yourself, Mr. President. The judiciary must be independent and long-lasting. While I agree that the current court members are problematic, this is no way to resolve it. The law is supposed to ensure the judiciary's independence by giving legal protection so they can't be pressured. Well, they need absolute immunity in theory, but look at what reality got us. We've got to deal with the most corrupt Chief Justice in the world and no chance to deal with him. We could impeach them. Or this. We do need the Constitution to be passed through before this. We could reform this after. I mean, no one should be able to get away with anything and be above the law. That's the end of it. And I'm not really sure. So, like, total immunity? Just, I'm not really sure. Like, the whole idea between checks and balances would be that somebody, like, the assembly should be able to impeach them. I understand that introduces a lot of political issues where you could just fabricate a reason to impeach justices you don't like and then stack the court. But, like, the inability to get rid of them. I mean, realistically, we could also just do term limits on them, and that would also work. Like, if we're going to do term limits, let's put it on everybody. And, I mean, they're no friends of me anyway. So, like, saying, let's not make them our enemies just yet, they already are. Like, the two guys came to my office to literally pressure me and then told me that they will try to torpedo everything that I do from now on anyway. So, like... Now, granted, we do have... Is not a political overview? We do have 3 members who are kind of in the middle of this. So... I guess, you know, if I say, let's do this, and they start writing it into the draft, the justices are going to come and, you know what I mean? Like, this is going to alienate the justices. When we need them to pass this, unfortunately. After we pass this, then we can change some stuff. So maybe let's not do this, although I could hide this as my trap card too. So maybe, for right now, let's not commit to this. Maybe we shouldn't make the Supreme Court our enemies just yet. See, I somewhat disagree with her. Now, she's the law and order person. She is a minister, and she's also on the court, but... or part of the court. But, like, I fail to see how immunity protects their independent decision-making. You know? I don't know. Like, we definitely want to do this, but... I still think term limits would just help. Like, let's just focus on term limits for everything. I do not know how much of a say I'm going to have in the final draft of this thing. I do not know how detailed that's going to be, but... yeah, let's maybe back away from this one right now. We don't want to chase away the centrists. Even though we should do this, but yeah, okay. Let's not make the Supreme Court our enemies just yet. Let's keep the reforms light. That is a better strategy. We'll need to sway some of their members to succeed, after all. And the last one is the question about Sol's legacy. Basically his Member of Honor law. It gave him absolute immunity even when he's retired. He's a permanent member of the Assembly as well, but luckily he doesn't really attend anymore. According to the Constitution, the Member of Honor not only has legal immunity, but the state also covers most of their expenses, as well as providing security at all times. It can only be given to someone by an absolute majority vote in the Assembly and the approval of the President. That's why only Tarquin Sol has that title. He gave it to himself right after his military coup. This law is basically made to save the colonel, and it has had a symbolic importance for Sordland because of it. We must get rid of this senseless law that protects him. He should be able to face justice for the atrocities that had taken place during his rule. I mean, yes, we should definitely do that. Keep the title, but take away the immunity clause. I don't see why former presidents should be just honorary members of the Assembly. And, I mean, you know, like... that doesn't make sense. Because to be elected president is one thing, right? To be elected a member of the Assembly is another thing. To be elected president and then be able to not be elected, but rather just sort of put yourself into the Assembly is something else entirely. And yeah, absolutely not do this. So I think we should abolish this. There's no reason to save it, and especially since it only affects one person who gave it to himself. Like, we should abolish the position. The reformists would be completely behind that. Well, regardless of what Mr. Rayne decides, we'll need to work together to push this agenda. Alright, well, let's start working on the draft. Presidential veto. Oh boy, here we are. Here we are. According to Article 77 and 82, the President may veto a bill by returning it to the Assembly with a written statement. The articles do not contain any information on how to override a veto. As a consequence, the President has an absolute veto that cannot be overridden by the Grand National Assembly under any circumstances. Limit vetoes to a three-fifths majority override. The new Constitution will allow the Grand National Assembly to override a veto with a three-fifths majority, or just remove them altogether. The new Constitution will not include any veto powers. The President may not block any legislation passed by the Grand National Assembly of Sordland. And we're going to go with limits. This is the draft now. Yes? Have I committed to something I'm not fully ready to do just yet? According to Article 5 of the Constitution, Constitutional Amendment Process, an amendment must be proposed by members of the Assembly with at least 150 signatures. See, let's get rid of this hard number and put in a percentage. A two-thirds majority vote in the Grand National Assembly and a simple majority vote in the Supreme Court is required for the amendment. As a consequence, the Supreme Court, which is not part of the elected legislative branch, has enormous power in the amendment process. The reason I say this is because if you change at any point the number of members in the Assembly, then this changes proportionately. It should be scaling. Anyway, the Supreme Court, which is not part of the legislative branch, has enormous power in the amendment process. Yeah, we will remove their veto powers. The constitutional amendment will not require the veto of the Supreme Court, or the vote, excuse me. This will remove their legislative powers, because they are not. Impeachment process. According to Article 17, the President of Sordland is not responsible for the actions performed in the exercise of presidential duties, except in the case of high treason or violation of the Constitution. In such cases, the President may be impeached by the Supreme Court in joint session with an absolute majority of its members. Therefore, the impeachment process only includes the Supreme Court, and it gives them great power over the executive. The Assembly and the Supreme Court may impeach. The President may be impeached with a two-thirds majority vote in both the Grand National Assembly and the Supreme Court. The Assembly may impeach. The President may be impeached with a two-thirds majority vote in the Grand National Assembly. The President may not be impeached at all by removing the cases about high treason and violation of the Constitution. The President will not be responsible for any actions performed in the exercise of presidential duties, and just do not change. Okay, so this would complicate it, interestingly. May be impeached with a two-thirds majority vote in both the Assembly and the Supreme Court. I still think that the Supreme Court should be taken out of this entirely, but this vastly would strengthen the executive, because you would need to go against the Supreme Court and the Grand National Assembly. And given that the party is the majority, and has been, and probably will be for a while, that would effectively make the President immune to impeachment. It would be difficult to do all that. But it's not very democratic, so just the Assembly? Supreme Court is not going to like that. But they've already said that they're not going to like it anyway, so I mean, like, what are we going to do? I don't know, though. This one might appease the Supreme Court just a bit. Just because they would still be in the loop, but it would still dilute their power alone, and then it would have to be a joint thing between the Assembly and the Supreme Court. It would probably not go over well with the reformists, because they just want the Assembly to have more power. We're putting an awful lot of faith in convincing the centrists to override the 5 old guard and join us in passing this thing. This is only a draft, though, right? This is only a draft. Appointment of ministers. According to the Constitution, the President appoints the ministers to the Council of Ministers from elected members of the Assembly. This requires no confidence vote from the Grand National Assembly. So the confidence vote will be required. The President may nominate ministers, which will require a confidence vote from the Grand National Assembly for their appointment, or the Grand National Assembly nominates the ministers. The Grand National Assembly may nominate a list of ministers which the President may appoint, or do not change a thing. Well, we're going to go with that. That is a half-and-half solution. If we're going to go half-and-half there, maybe I should go half-and-half with the impeachment thing. I still think it's more correct to just put that in the hands of the Assembly. Especially since the Assembly is elected. Electoral threshold. According to Article 50, a political party needs a minimum of 10% of the total national vote to win seats in the Grand National Assembly. The votes of the party who pass the threshold are redistributed proportionally, meaning USP, which currently holds the lead, would be the main beneficiary. Decrease the threshold to 8%. The new constitution will have an 8% threshold for political parties. This may allow the Workers' Party of Bludia and the Communist Party of Sordland to be elected in the next elections, or decrease below 3%. The new constitution will have a 3% threshold for political parties. This would allow many smaller parties to be elected in the next elections, significantly reducing the power of the USP. Okay, my party is definitely not going to be behind that one, but the reformists, I mean, this is a small handout to the reformists. This helps gain a little bit of traction for possible coalition governments that could squeeze out the NFP even more. So let's do 8%. Presidential decrees. According to Article 18 and 51, the President is able to issue decrees on political, social, and economic issues that would carry the force of law. They could not contradict the Constitution and are subject to judicial review. Therefore, the President may issue decrees in many subjects without going through the Grand National Assembly. However, the Assembly may pass legislation on the same subjects to override the presidential decrees. Decrees require an enabling act. The President will not be able to issue decrees that would carry the force of law without an enabling act from the Grand National Assembly. Which, okay, so now I guess I understand that. Remove decrees. The President will not be able to issue decrees that would carry the force of law, making the Grand National Assembly the sole law-making authority. Do not change. Okay. I think it was here, right? Order. Military. Definitely not military diplomacy. This is not it either. President may veto bills. Decrees. Okay, I was wondering if it was going to have a positive or negative thing here, but that is not the case. Okay. Well, okay. So it's a little bit different. It's a little bit different. Immediately, I can put this issue forward that then the Grand National Assembly would have to react to. That's a little bit... I mean, it's basically a standing order, right? But it could be knocked down. I mean, there are checks and balances in this. So it's not quite as severe as I had thought before. This enabling act thing doesn't make much sense to me. This feels more like a political gimmick. Like, if something is stuck in gridlock in the assembly, then the majority party, like mine, would be able to just say, Mr. President, why don't you take care of this? And then I would issue a decree. I think we don't change this one. I mean, realistically speaking, getting rid of decrees altogether is kind of a thing. But at the same time, being able to immediately take charge of a situation, I mean, it's kind of like an emergency power without being an emergency power. You know what I mean? And this is something that they were talking about. The reformists want these gone, but not everybody does. And it would dilute the power of the office. Yeah, let's not change that one. According to the Constitution, the President shall be elected for 4 years. However, there is no mention of a term limit, allowing one individual to be able to run, be elected, and serve as President without limits. Can change it to 2 terms. No person shall be elected to the office of the President more than twice, or just don't change it. Well, on the one hand, there's something to be said for, if people want to elect the same guy, they can just keep doing it. On the other hand, what we know about political corruption and all that is that mechanisms can be put in place to ensure that the same person gets voted over and over. What I'm thinking about here is not necessarily my term. I'm trying to be benevolent, but in future problems, once you set a precedent, it is hard to uproot that. As this current situation is showing, reforming the Constitution is not the easiest thing, and it may be less so in future. I think limitations are a good idea, especially because it forces change. There's no reason that one generation should be able to hold sway over several others down the road just because of that institutionalization. So yeah, let's force change through the term. Immunity of the justices. The Constitution gives the justices of the Supreme Court total immunity and describes no procedure of impeachment, making them untouchable by other branches of government. Okay, so that's basically the difference now, is that they can be impeached or they cannot. The Supreme Court justices may be proposed to be impeached on the legal grounds of unconstitutional behavior. A valid impeachment proposal will require 2/3 majority decision of the Grand National Assembly to impeach the individual justice. Now, this is an interesting thing. Who determines the unconstitutional behavior if not the Supreme Court? Would it be my Ministry of Justice then? This is interesting. It does dilute the power of the Supreme Court, but it also puts a check on them. But it also gives undue power necessarily to the Assembly. I still think we should do it. As I said, no one should be above the law. But I still feel like something, term limits would be a better solution. Well, a better middle ground solution, I guess. Because now this the way it's worded does seem to be very politically charged. Like I said, there is the concern of emptying the court and then just reinstating or rather refilling it with sympathetic justices. Either way leads to corruption. I mean, it opens the door either way. But if they're not removable by impeachment, and therefore not removable any other way, then you basically make them appointed for life, and I strongly oppose that. I don't know, part of me feels like if this is a draft, this is not yet the final thing, if this is a draft, I should have just gone with don't change anything and made the game change all this, but I don't think it was ever going to let me do that. Judges can be impeached by the Assembly. Honorary membership of Tarquin Sol. Article 99 of the Constitution defines the Member of Honor title, its appointment procedure, as well as rights their members may exercise. A Member of Honor has absolute immunity and is considered to be a permanent member of the Grand National Assembly. They are given control of their own personal security team provided by the state's presidential guards. A member is also eligible to live in a special private residence provided by the state for free. The only person who holds the title is Tarquin Sol. So you basically allow for all the same stuff, you're just removing the immunity with this one. I think we just abolish it altogether. It serves no purpose. Yeah, I guess. After I made the final changes for the proposal, I showed it to my team. They read the changes and discussed it amongst themselves. Lucian spoke afterwards. Looks like the amendments are ready to be proposed. But I have to say this, too. The new electoral threshold will be really difficult for the party to accept. Our guys are not fond of that idea. That's true, it will be tough to get all of their support. Some of our members may try to openly fight against this. I mean, I'm not willing to reconsider that, but I could say that. I mean, if it becomes the one sticking issue on getting this thing passed, I'll reconsider it. So, I'm prepared to reconsider if it comes to that. We will all do our best to make it work, sir. Any other comments before we proceed? I will say that I do not agree with the new law that gives the Assembly the power to impeach the judges of the Supreme Court. I'm also against the Chief Justice and his obstructionist behavior, but even if we get rid of all of them, the new judges will be less independent with this law. They'll be scared to go against the administration when it's needed. They'll need their protection to do their job. Otherwise, the new ones will be pawns, just like Sol's old guards. But the fuck does that mean? His old guards have immunity. They might have been his cronies under his law, but there were presidents since then? And right now they're running rampant? Like, I get what she's saying, and this is something I've thought about. But I don't know, like, I guess we just assume that they would not... Fuck, I don't know. But it's more important that we get rid of the old guards, Mrs. Morgna. After the obstacles are gone, we can strive to make it better. However, he turned to me. You have to be very careful, Anton. I'm sure you'll be fine, but with all that's happening out there, we'll need to prepare against these threats one way or the other. I mean, the Constitution's not yet changed, but I appreciate the feedback, Peter. Well, I think we can proceed now. I'll personally work on the wording of this proposal with my hand-picked legal experts. With Ms. Morgna's reputation as the most experienced attorney, this proposal will be bulletproof. Chief Justice Orso will have a hard time convincing others to oppose it. That's good. That's good. I don't know, maybe I should have just followed the advice and just done everything they said. So, like, kept the immunity in place. In the meantime, you must introduce this proposal to our party. You will need to get them to back us if we want to pass the Assembly. Sir, I advise you first talk to the leaders of both conservative and reformist wings of the party. As far as I'm aware, Mr. Clavin supports the reforms already. Mrs. Tory will be the real problem. She became the real heavyweight after we left for the executive. Any advice in regards to dealing with them? As Mr. Vectorn said, Mr. Clavin will probably be easier to persuade. We need to unite the party under this, so his support is vital. Mrs. Gloria will be tougher to break. Don't you mean Mrs. Glory? Or Mrs. Tory? Yeah. Mrs. Tory will be tougher to break. The problem is she's capable of turning the moderates and conservatives against us. As much as I don't want to say this, if she makes demands to change the proposal, we may need to give in. Well, thanks for the advice. Wish you good luck with the party, sir. I think we can end the meeting here. We all shook hands and they left the room. Oh boy, oh boy. Sordland today. Richter's victory over Rayne. Our sources informed us that the plan is underway by the government to start the drafting of the reform package. The Rayne administration has reached out to the PFJP led by Franz Richter despite his history of criticizing and opposing the USP, even calling Rayne yet another pawn that was put forward as candidate during the campaign elections in 1953. It is the first time in a USP government that the president is cornered to work with his unapologetic rivals to this extent. If anything significant can come out of this collaboration is yet to be seen. Okay, that's oddly phrased. If USP isn't capable of showing strength like it used to, and forced to accept the demands of their longtime rivals, perhaps it is time to realize that their time has passed. We're doubtful if President Rayne can protect the wishes of the USP voters, let alone display enough political power to make meaningful changes in our country. The Lockhaven Times. Preparations underway for the annual Benfey Festival. It's that time of year again, the largest cultural festival in the entire Sordland. Benfey Festival. That's just a weird, the entire Sordland. Like the entirety of Sordland, but the entire Sordland is just weird. Benfey Festival has begun its preparations. This year's venue was picked to be the newly built Benfey High Arts Center, with a total capacity of 8,000 people. For those who do not have tickets, they can always enjoy the events that span the whole city. Especially after the recent events, we can't wait for 4 days of panels, theater, plays, exhibitions, and music. Okay. I've signed a draft, yeah. I feel like maybe I should have just listened to everybody's advice instead of overthinking it on my own there. Okay, so we got another thing here. Let's read about this report from the Whole Sword Committee, Reform Committee started preparations. Vice President Vectorn reported that, along with Lucian Gallade, the committee has started working on the written aspects of the package as per the needs outlined previously. They will soon get the legal team involved to complete the writing process. The needed 150 signatures for the proposal has started to be collected within the USP. All right. We'll pick that up next time.